What's going on, friends and family? How we doing? How we feeling? Hope we doing all right. Tonight I wanted to get on spiritual dynamics. I wanted to see what I can theorize with how the future might look as far as relationships, because there's a silent culture we're upholding, and I know that it shapes many things just based on the programming and how people think in general. But then when you bring it down to what the basis is and what happens as a result of having the wrong types of people as the main, or having the wrong types of people as the representatives to what normalcy looks like, then you start to get a range of various outcomes, right? So when talking about spirituality and stuff like that, when it comes to relationships or when it comes to society, we think about how it relates to energy, and we think about how it relates to how we operate with one another, and what we discuss when we want to talk about what benefits relationships the most, right? So of course the goal is to be somebody who can maintain their own energy and defend that from other people, just because that makes you more capable to be yourself, right? If you have a high energy and you're able to output that whatever asset you want to, right, or whatever thing you want to put it in. Say you want to work a job and you want to put forth as much energy as you can to that job so it benefits the most from your energy. That way you get seen in a certain light, or like your value is higher in that regard, right? Or maybe you're somebody who's very creative and you want to put as much of your creative energy into your creative modes of creation. Like say you do drawing or sketching, or maybe you create sculptures or something, right? You want to have a lot of energy to maintain that stuff. So spiritually, you want to be able to defend this energy as you build it up, right? Through intuition, through knowledge, and through persistence and consistency. And then as you do that, then you want to find people on that same frequency to relate to. And then at some point you guys come about with the same opinions and whatnot, or you converge and whatnot, and you decide that you like the person, or that you like how they operate because it's relative to how you have energetically or spiritually. And then relationships can be born that way, right? This is actually the highest, to me, this is the most pristine way to find relationships, is based on frequency and energy, because it's easier to have conversation, it's easier to relate, it's easier to have opinions that you would accept immediately, or are easily acceptable to you and the other person. And then this allows a fruitful growth pattern to develop with that relationship, right? And it's a really lovely thing. So when it comes to couples then who operate with this type of mindset, right, which is good, you want to find somebody or find people on the same frequency as you all the time, even if it's not romantically. You can just be, platonically, for your friends or for family or for potential acquaintances when you want to do things, right? But the idea is that when you're doing this and you're finding people that you relate to energetically, we're not always doing this with the best morals in mind, right? We're not necessarily doing this and having the same goals in mind all the time. Now we can have the same energies and frequencies, right, and have similar capabilities, but where we put these energies to can differ. And if we're not putting them towards things that help us or help one another, or something that could be beneficial to people or society, or it could be even harmful, right? You have to decide whether what you're doing is ethical or not. And for the most part, we don't consider that. We don't even think about that. It's not a main priority. It's just something we subline and something we don't consider important until it's too late, until we really figure like what we've done could have been harmful to us, right? Or it has been harmful to us. So talking about this and considering relationships, I've noticed for the most part that when people find couples, or when people come about and mate with one another and create relationships with one another, and then they become couples, usually the intent after that, after they get stable and find out that they're with somebody that they want to stay with for a while, usually the intent is not positive. And that's just because of how society operates and how we're programmed. If you notice, I don't like to generalize because I don't know, you can't say things are a monolith, or you can't say certain genders are a monolith, but I've noticed that for programming wise, women are programmed or socialized to use men, not necessarily for positive gain, just to see if she can get something out of the man, because that helps her immediately, right? And you're not helped at all in society. So if you find yourself to be in a really tough position and you got to do what you got to do to make ends meet, you're going to do what you can, right? And if that means going at the expense of a man, they're likely going to do that. And they're socialized to accept that behavior as normal, which is harmful to both people, or both genders, right? So these kinds of women, they mate with men who are similar in value to that, or similar in mindset. So the men who do this on the flip side are men who use women, who, I wouldn't say abuse women, but are likely to abuse women if this is their mindset, right? And these men just so happen to be people who are able to be financially stable just because this society benefits that type of man immediately. If you know anything about corporate culture or corporate influence, the way they decide employees is based on the level of codependence, as well as how willing they are to go against themselves for that company, right? So this essentially becomes psychopathic men, this becomes sociopathic men, this becomes people who don't really have a strict value sense and are very malleable. So what that means is that they'll go against common morals or natural order of living in order to gain some sort of financial stability. And they know these men are the most beneficial to corporations just because they're gonna go ahead and not give a damn about what happens so long as they get their payments met, right? That's all that they care about. And they're actually programmed to do that as well in this society. You're told that if you don't make money or you make enough to make ends meet, then that essentially means you don't have legitimacy in this system, which is not fair, because nobody should ever have to do something to make ends meet, right? You shouldn't have to have a certain material to make ends meet, just because we already live in a world that's very abundant of resources that meet our basic needs, like food and water, shelter. These things are immediately here. They've been here. We have enough room and enough things for everybody, so there's no need to add the extra caveat of money. Maybe just for the fact that you don't want to run out of resources too quickly, but outside of that, there is no need to hoard or to limit through false scarcity, right? But the idea is that you are programmed to always look for money, which is everywhere. You see it in music, you see it in film, you see it on social media, you see it by influencers, you see it everywhere. You're told it's money or it's nothing, right? You're told you work or nothing else, or homelessness or something bad, right? And this is not really fair to most people, but there's not much you can do about the situation, just because we're programmed and we're told that it's a normalcy, even though we know for the most part it's not. So we tell each other that this is the basis for mating then. So when you want to find another partner, their mindset is usually on that same frequency, right? It's on the same kind of thing. And the idea is that women uphold this as well, because they're socialized to go ahead and exploit the men if they can, right? Especially if they're more manipulable. So exploitation is kind of seen as the norm then, and this is upheld because it helps them, right? I mean, I don't really judge too much for how you use your circumstances to get what you want, especially if it worked for you and if it didn't do too much damage to other people. Although I don't think people understand the damage they do, so they still do what they do and not understand like how dangerous it could be. But there's usually a danger to exploitation, and people don't really care too much about that, which is why you see, I think this is actually why people have accepted that our rights are they're not valid anymore in this system, which is kind of dangerous to say, because if we actually believe and uphold that our rights don't matter, then that could just mean you can do whatever to somebody and likely not have to be accountable, which is not good. I mean, you got to think about your children, you got to think about your livelihood, where you live. If people can do that to you and you have to live around people, that doesn't sound like a very safe scenario, if you ask me. But anyways, so mating is based on the exploitation then, right? So couples who come to this idea, and they meet each other and form a relationship based on the intent to help one another, right? But also uphold that exploitation if that's what they've done to become autonomous enough to be stable and find a mate. Then they become a power couple with exploitation, right? And the intent is then to continue exploiting for their own gain, right? They become one to exploit others for gain, right? And then this is where you get the idea that their regulation system, right, for their nervous system is not necessarily a positive one, right? And we hear things about projection, shaming, and belittling culture, right? So if you think about what a narcissist looks like in this scenario, a narcissist is somebody who will do absolutely everything to uphold not only their ideology, but to have that stability as well through exploitation and whatnot. So they have to be seen as better than the majority if they can coerce or manipulate. If you're not coercible or manipulable, they immediately dislike you, right? They try to harm you. They try to discredit you somehow. You got to get away from those people. But a narcissist is somebody who does this all the time. This is their lifestyle. So let's put that idea into somebody who does seek to exploit for gain, right? Because that's naturally the path, right? The sociopath pathway, if you decide that exploitation is a norm for you, right? So let's put that idea onto the people who are potentially looking for mates to have relationships with, right? So these kinds of people bond together. They form a group together on that intent, the intent to exploit or to be seen as better than other people. So in order to maintain that sense of being seen as better than, or being seen as somebody who can maintain their status, right? And usually this is not a legitimate status, it's just whatever they've said. But if they can uphold that and then tell each other that this is what we want to base our livelihood on the idea that we can exploit, get away with it, and uphold our ideologies in order to keep our status up as well, and the perceptions of others. But the idea is that they do this as a livelihood. So in a couple format, then there's the idea of shaming culture when it comes to those couples. So they decide that if they can find somebody who is in a position that is unfortunate or like less than in status in comparison to them by whatever standards or whatever rule sets they have for that, then they decide that in order to maintain some sort of living mechanism to have that livelihood, they will project onto these kinds of people and maintain that as a normalcy, right? And then this shapes the way that we think when it comes to autonomous couples or what relationships should look like in this society. So when these kinds of couples are the majority, or at least make up a good representation of the whole of couples, and they're shaming and they're projecting and they're belittling in order to make other people seem less than them, that tells the other people that this is what they should do in order to have a stable relationship, right? That is a silent programming that's seriously dangerous. So let's give a very good scenario, because this is very common. Let's say that there is a group of women, right? Longtime friends. One of these women finally finds a husband. Her husband and her are an emotionally exploitative power couple, right? So when they engage with these people, right, when they go out, when they do whatever they do with each other, usually they're going to be able to get off that coercive exploitation to either their friends or to surrounding people and be enabled by their friends or other people that know them, right? And so this tells those that enable or that witness or that are acted upon by it that in order to be autonomous as a couple and be stable financially, that you have to do this behavior. You have to subconsciously or actively project your insecurities or shame people to feel less than you in order to have a status, or coerce them in a way to make them feel less than you while you live however you live your life, right? So for women, I've noticed that they soak this kind of stuff up. I'm not saying that women are slow. I'm not saying they're stupid. I just see that this happens very often with women, more often than not than men. That's from my personal experience. I can't speak on everybody. I cannot speak for everyone's situation, but I have noticed that women will see that behavior and decide that's how it's supposed to be done. Okay? Women are not a monolith. I absolutely don't believe that. Everybody's different. They all have their own unique mindsets. But there are a great deal of women who say shaming culture is normal because there are other women who do this in couples or in relationships, who have children, who have houses and whatnot, and have cars and whatnot. And they think that that just means that that's what you're supposed to do. And it's basically because of the programming, right? I know personally that women have an extremely important innate power in shaping social dynamics, specifically for relationships, because when it comes down to it, they choose men, but they have to choose men who are able, right? Who are strong-willed, who have the capability to be a potential father or a long-term mate, right? But this isn't necessarily upheld in the modern day just because we're programmed to not give a damn about natural cohesion anymore, right? We sideline love, we sideline empathy, we weaponize those traits. Even we weaponize love against people for exploitation, right? So those things are put on the back burner while exploitation is put on the mainframe, right? Which means you can do whatever you need to get your stability, so long as you're doing it for yourself or for your couple, right? But you know, it is what it is. You can't really, I say that we have the power to stop this, but you can't stop people who decide they don't want to operate any other way because they've done so for a long time, right? And if this is a majority, there's not much you can do outside of trying to get authority to change the rules. But we're not authority. We don't have that capability, right? Unless you literally are somebody who has that power or that status, or you have a connection to that, and maybe you can get them to change the way that we communicate or operate conversationally or in relationships. There's not much you can do about leadership enforcing the inverse of natural relationships and connection, right? So the shaming culture programs single women and men to adopt the shaming culture in order to have autonomy as a couple, or to have a potential mate who you can be financially stable with. And that it not only further harms social cohesion, but it enmeshes us to do that. And so when many couples decide this is how they have to operate, eventually they're gonna have to find more people that are manipulable enough to be at the end of their projection, right? Because the mindset of somebody that operates like that, or couples that operate like that, is that they need the status in hierarchy, right? But if you have people who are similar to you, who know what you're doing, who do the same material as you, or who you've taught to do the same, or teach you to do the same, you can't necessarily get off the same effects with them, right? So you need people who are less knowledgeable or more naive in nature, right? And these are people usually who are single or have been in less relationships, or are less likely to know what it is that's being upheld silently, right? So what happens is that this forces people to try to isolate people into a way where they can't be autonomous in order to find out how they operate or become like them, to be financially exploitative or just exploitative in general, right? They try to isolate them in a way and coerce them and groom them in a way to where they make it seem like what they're doing is right, even though usually what they're doing is right. Is just, in their eyes, it's seen as incorrect because they're taught incorrectly. But they make their life seem like what they're doing is correct, but the idea is to keep them isolated in that way by grooming them and making them feel as if everything is okay in the moment, right? not knowing that there is a great majority of people who operate on the inverse of natural order. So when they try to limit certain people, it's to maintain them in a way to where they're coerced and groomed to stay as a potential victim for their potential projection and hierarchy maintaining for status, right? So this happens to be, for the most part, attractive people, attractive women specifically. So they are, like, more often than not targeted to be in that position because they're a little bit easier exploitable in nature, just because attractive women have to be very strong-willed. Attractive people have to be strong-willed. They're attacked vehemently by pretty much anybody. If there's somebody who figures who you are, and then say you're attractive, and then they find out that you also have talents, you have specific traits about you that make you really shine, you're an honest person, you're authentic, you're really gonna get seen as a potential target because you operate naturally and they don't. And they had to do a whole lot in order to be stable and feel like it's not fair that you can do that naturally, and they had to do other things, right, in order to have financial stability. So they want to use your idea that you can do it naturally against you to groom you into thinking this is where you're gonna stay. You can't have any potential you can't potentially find mates who are similar to you, just because we're gonna surround you with people who do the inverse of how you live, even though you live naturally. And that tells those people, if they can figure this out, that it's gonna be much harder to do natural living, just because there's so many people who do this, who subconsciously find people and then try to limit them in a way to where they can maintain that sense of hierarchy maintaining or status maintaining by keeping them in a groomed position. This is why attractive people who are competent and talented are told, you gotta be fierce, you gotta be strong, this stuff is not for the weak, you gotta be able to have money, because these people are relentless when it comes to this stuff. They don't stop when it comes to limiting you. If they can get a hold on you, they will. If they can surveil you, they will. If they can coerce you, do witchcraft on you, manipulate you, coerce you, harm you, get you scapegoated, they will do it. And don't think they won't do it. Don't think that this is beyond anybody. Anybody will do this. Anybody in this system will do this. So you have to be careful with these kind of people, right? Especially if you're attractive. So what this does is, if it happens for a while and they're able to groom you long enough to start learning how you operate, start learning where you go, what you do, what you like to do, what your hobbies are, what your habits are, what you do at certain times of the day, they start to monitor you really meticulously in order to make sure that it's harder for you to break away from the grooming that they're trying to entrap you in. And usually this is not fairly placed. They try to look for these things early on before you're even old enough, right? I see this stuff happening before people are even like 15 years old. This is happening before they're getting assessed, before they're even old enough to formulate what relationships are or what this stuff is, right? And it's not fair, and then it puts them up against such vicious attack before they can even defend it, right? And they know what they're doing. These people know exactly what they're doing. They don't want you to be autonomous at all. They want to harm you, right? They want to harm a lot of people. And they've gotten a lot of people, from what I've noticed, they've gotten a lot of people to just go ahead and go against their own nature, just because there's so many people who are going to be against them. And that kind of gives off a sense of fear that they don't want to have to deal with, right? But this limits them, right? And it's not fair. It shouldn't even be happening to anybody, but this is what they do because they don't know how else to operate, and they're kind of afraid not to have their illusion maintained that the inverse is stronger, because they reroute their nervous systems to uphold it. So collapse in this way feels really like it feels life-threatening for many people. It feels like death for many people, honestly. And that is a stretch, because it's just your emotions. It's just your feelings. You can get over that stuff. If you collapse, you can get over that stuff, okay? It's not a bullet. It's not a knife. it's your emotions. You can get over that stuff, but they don't know that, and they don't care. And then the accountability is removed anyway, and they are immune from repercussion because the system upholds them, and it also enables them, right? They're rewarded for this stuff. So basically, to summarize, couples develop shaming culture in order to maintain their status, but to also marginalize, groom, coerce, and scapegoat people who are not able to get in that position, because they feel like that position is awarded only to the most ruthless, right? Which is true, but that's not a good thing. So the shaming culture, and because it is normalized in couples, tells other people subconsciously that it's the norm, and that destructive behavior is the norm. And this is why we're at the stage we're at today with spirituality, with spiritual warfare, with warfare tactics in general, with manipulation and witchcraft. We're at the stage where there are many people, many couples who live this lifestyle. Like they try to make it so hidden, and it's really dangerous too, and it's really insidious. But they hide this stuff really, really well because they've done it for so many years. They don't make it known that when they go out with other couples, they're actually assessing each other. They're having back and forths subconsciously with one another, right? When they're giving you microaggressions or passive aggressiveness, right? This is also another tactic they use in order to get off that little projection that they need, right? That sadistic drive that they want. When they're constantly inviting you to things, right? They're trying to get you into positions so where they can drain you conversationally, and then try to assess how you live or how you think, so that way they can get you further groomed into a worse position, right? Couples fight each other too as well. If one couple feels like their status is being harmed by another couple, even if they're a friend, they'll try to groom them in a way to try to limit their exposure or limit their potential in order to seem better than, right? At the expense of them. That is a seriously self-hating ideology, but it's the norm. It's a problem with these kind of couples, which is why I think we gotta really understand that this is the kind of thing that people do, man. So I just wanted to summarize all that to bring to the idea that if we're gonna have couples in the future, we're gonna have to build couples based on more truthfulness, more honesty. And yes, it's definitely better on spiritual frequencies that you are relating or that you are relating to one another. But if you can't uphold good morals while doing that, I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to go ahead and have those relationships, even if it's rewarded, because of the danger and because of the potential danger it has on the children as well, because they adopt the same programming. Children who are born in these kinds of family dynamics with these kinds of couples, they mimic this behavior. They witness what happens. They grow up to do the exact same things or worse, because children usually they're sponges as well. So they take in this information and they learn it early. So when they get older, they have a much more dangerous output, just because they've been able to harness it before they're even able to begin starting to use it in society. And the parents enable this behavior, as well as the people they keep around them. So we got to think about that, think about the future, think about what our behavior does to people, what it does to our potential future and our children, what it does to our society, and if we care or not to uphold natural order just to maintain the sense of peace that enables all of our freedom in the system. That's all I can say on that, honestly. We're gonna have to get to a point where we don't do this anymore. It's all programming. If you think about it, it comes from capitalism, and it comes from the need to be better than, right? From the boomers to the Gen X, who uphold this system at the top, at least. And then it just trickled down to everybody else. But we don't have to uphold that. Just because they say doesn't mean that you have to do it. It doesn't mean that that's how you have to live your life. I understand that they have money. I understand that they have status that you think is legitimate. I understand it. But they're just people too. Just like you and me, they're just people. They just so happen to have wealth. And we define that wealth by money, by paper money or digital, right? And that doesn't mean anything other than they have that accumulation of stuff, which allows them access to assets. That's all that means. That doesn't mean that they're your God. It doesn't mean that they should have control over your life. That doesn't mean that you should try to control others' lives. I'm going to go ahead and let that thought bubble up for you guys. Let me know what you guys thought. That's all I have for today. Hope you guys have a good night and peace out.